And the science was very clear to us that this is a major global issue, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes front and centre as an identified risk for airlines in the aviation sectors we have for aviation. They are long lead times. There's no obvious answers, so all of the potential solutions take being committed. So that's the 14 airlines representing 20% of global aviation. So actually in a space of 3 years, you've gone from one airline to the whole industry, an airline level and a government level have made the same.
In the grand scheme of things, aviation is such a minimal percentage.
Right.
If it stopped, as it did, the temperature of the world still rises.
As the target says, we've all got to achieve net zero emissions. So that's basically zero by 2050. Great sort of special case for aviation. We say, we just want our fair access. We have to recognise that in aviation we have very few alternatives. It will happen though without policy support, and that's absolutely clear. And it's not aviation separately. He says, we are in an energy transition, and if you look back at the previous transitions from coal to oil to gas, each of those has taken 60 years.
Yeah.
We don't have 60 years. So for us moving to new energy solutions for aviation, at best we've got 20. I mean, that is a risk that because...
Also, there is the capability of doing that.
You can do it. We call it tankering in the fuel
Someone who takes that
suppliers.
decision.
It's on the fuel suppliers, and if they don't provide the fuel, they have to pay a penalty. We call it the buyout. So it's without, there's no coincidence that 90% of the investment in sustainable aviation fuels capacity is taking place in the States. Only be the oil companies that will have the balance sheets and the financial muscle to scale up the SAF industry. I think what I like about IAG is we tend not to shout too much about what we're doing until we can fully substantiate it. And I think that's right, because one of the big risks we have as an industry is there's a lot of greenwash going. This is the aviation value chain, the most exciting place. And actually there have been 750,000 flights on sustainable aviation fuels, so we know it works.
Everyone to the Flying High Car podcast. It is lovely to have you back. Thank you for viewing, listening and subscribing. It's been such a pleasure. Again, like I say, update. We're now on episode 7. It's been an amazing journey. Didn't think we'd get this far. And, quite frankly, today I'm actually privileged to have the guest that we have. I have the Rockstar of Sustainable Aviation. He is the head of Sustainability at IAG. He is the chair of the Jet Zero Council in the UK and a previous chair of the IATA Sustainability Council. He's literally sustainability royalty, and it's such a pleasure to have him here today. It's Jonathon Counsell, everybody.
Thank you, Reza. Very kind words. And it's great to be here and to join you to talk about a subject that is very, very passionate to me and close to my heart.
I'm so pleased to be able to have this opportunity, Jonathon, because it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been educated along the way, and it's not something that came to me quite easily. It's a challenging topic and such a relevant one, especially for the future generations. And this is why we set up the platform, to give people the mechanism to talk to tomorrow's world and tell them what aviation is like and how we should be building aviation of the future. And that's what we're going to dive into today. But where I want to start, Jonathon, is how did you get into travel? What was your career as a young boy? How did you start?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm an engineer by background, mechanical engineer. I actually started off in the oil and gas industry for Exxon many years ago. So some say I'm paying for past misdemeanors. It's not the way it worked, but just after university, went to business school, and then started getting a passion for aviation. Did a couple of business cases at business school, and then got into management consulting to the aviation sector, and then got my first airline job back in 1995 with Air New Zealand down in Auckland, and then 4 years after that came and joined BA in 1999. So most of my career now, nearly 35 years, have been in the aviation industry. And then sort of early 2000s, it became very clear to me that sustainability and climate change is going to be a major issue for our industry, and that if we didn't address it, we would probably lose our right to grow as a sector. And my boss at the time, Willie Walsh, I finished a particular role. So most of my roles were sort of strategy focused. I said, look, I think we need to really get on top of this. This is 2007. And he said, yeah, no, I totally agree. And so I became head of environment at British Airways. And yeah, so that was, nearly 15, 16 years ago. And never looked back.
So you've been at this for a long time, tackling this, and as crude as it sounds, only recently it sounds like everyone else has cottoned on or actually starting to take this thing seriously. So back in the 2000s, when you were looking at this and you identified this as a problem, it wasn't a global discussed issue. So how were you finding that in your role? Were you constantly blocked, or how does it work?
Yeah, no, it has been a challenging path to get it to sort of centre focus. But our view was, and we're always led by the science, and the science was very clear to us that this is a major global issue, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes front and centre as an identified risk for airlines in the aviation sector. So in a way, we sort of felt this is going to give us time to get ready and do some of the sort of groundwork to get the right policies in place so that we can, when this does become a really serious or recognise a serious issue, we'll be able to secure the funding to essentially develop the technology solutions. Because one of the challenges we have for aviation, they are long lead times. There's no obvious answers, so all of the potential solutions take time.
Yeah, no, and it's also quite fascinating when you mention your background, an engineer. We've had people from retail, we've had people from technology, and it's so, and this is why we created the podcast. You can be really a lot of things in aviation, this ecosystem of aviation. You can go into venture capital, you can go into engineering, pilot, everything. We've had Willie Walsh, you mentioned, a pilot that turned into a CEO.
Exactly.
It's quite amazing in those examples, and they don't, it's not so prevalent in other industries. So that's something to be proud of. That
I think so. It's a very sort of welcoming industry. It's so exciting as well. I think once you've been in aviation, it's difficult to work in any other sector. It's such a great place to be. There's so many variety of roles, so many challenges. We are at the behest of all global sort of issues. So whenever there's something happen globally, we tend to get hit by that. But that's what makes the role exciting. On the sustainability side, I love technology, being an engineer, and I absolutely convinced there will be solutions that will enable us to address this problem. But it's just about accelerating the development of those. It's also a mix of politics and economics, because essentially nothing will happen without government regulation. So that's probably where I spend, as well as talking to technology companies, particularly about sustainable aviation fuels or hydrogen-powered aircraft or electric-powered aircraft. It's talking to governments to make sure we've got the right policies in place to secure the funding to accelerate those solutions.
And this is the interesting part. There are so many moving parts and external stakeholders, and I'll come to this point, but I'll say it now. And it's a question I want you to ponder, which an answer later is, I think it's ridiculous, personally, that you have to bear the brunt as an airline to bring the cogs together. I know you have to fly and you have a duty to make yourself sustainable while flying, but you're not in charge of producing fuel. You're not a fuel company.
No, indeed.
You don't make planes. There are other people who make planes. And you don't regulate the space. You're not in charge of that. Other people do that. But yet you have to take the forward thing. I'd love to hear your response, but let's give it.
And we, in the world of climate change, there's this principle called polluter pays. So basically what you do is you apply the regulation at the point that the carbon dioxide is emitted. And we accept that. So carbon pricing is the sort of primary mechanism that is going to incentivize all companies to reduce their emissions, not just in aviation, across the whole global economy. And we accept that. It'll be airlines that will be paying for the carbon emissions. But in terms of the solutions, that is a value chain challenge. So, it shouldn't be airlines that should be building SAF plants, for instance, or developing new aircraft. It should be working with our, other partners in the supply chain to accelerate those solutions. But ultimately, we accept that the carbon pricing piece of that regulation happens at the point of pollution, because that's where you have to provide the right incentives.
Okay, so we're going to come to that in a bit. But where I want to tackle to you is Jonathon Counsell the person. I described you as a rock star in sustainability because wherever I go,
Aging.
rock star nonetheless. Rock star nonetheless. But wherever I go, any industry event, anything to do with aviation, I see you at the forefront, raising this flag of sustainability, and I see people in awe. And when I describe and they're like, do you work with Jonathon Counsell? Have you worked with him before? I say, yeah, I'm proud to say I have, and I have
Wow,
deep.
that's very kind.
No, these are facts of industry, and it's amazing to see, and it's again a pleasure to have you here. But
Thank you.
That, and this is where I often reach out to young people. Reach out to, how do you become good in this space, or how do you become excellent at what you do? Is there anything that any event, any advice that you can give of when you find something you are possibly passionate about, how do you grow to become that expert in that space? How did you get to where you got to in that?
Yeah, I think the key is if you've got a passion for the subject. And for me, I mean, the sort of driving motivation is, I love aviation. I think aviation is a real force for good. It's the thing that's probably the richest experience of most people's lives comes through the what happens through flying, connecting people, going to places, seeing our planet, and so on. Yeah. And it's clear that the economic benefits of flying are very, very significant. But we have to address this, this climate change issue. We are, a hard to decarbonise sector. Those solutions will take a long time. So really, the drive for me is to enable sort of future generations, my kids and their kids, to enjoy the very significant benefits of flying by addressing this particular environmental challenge that we have. And I'm absolutely convinced we can do it. It was. When I first started, sort of 15, 16 years ago, you thought this is going to be a tough one. But one of the great things at aviation, we're used to working collaboratively. We've done it for years, mainly driven through safety.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've always been very good at is, addressing safety issues so that we can continue to make flying the safest form of transport. We're now doing the same in terms of sustainability. So it's a great community. For anyone getting to this industry, it's the learning is, there's so many opportunities to learn about the subject. It's quite complicated. If you took IATA, for instance, our industry association do great work in this space. Their website's full of information. ICAO, our global regulator. So there's sort of two places I always go to pick up information, and then just immerse yourself with people that are deeply involved in this area, and just learn from them.
So this is the other thing. This is, I feel like, the new sector or subsector of aviation that I think is going to fly, this sustainability sector, because these teams are going to grow. And one of the reasons I create this platform is to showcase what is available as careers in aviation, because it's a workers' market out there. There's so much choice. You're going to be competing against tech companies and new startups and things like that. But being mission related in your job is so satisfying. I think a lot of young people are searching for that.
Yeah.
And by all means, having the travel benefits and being able to travel at the same time of the world, that's another thing. But being able to influence and change it, I think that's what a lot of people are seeking, rather than just the remuneration aspect. So this sustainability, this division that's being created probably in every airline group and things like that, there isn't, probably degrees now that will be sustainability degrees and masters and things like that. But I think they're really fresh and very in their infancy in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's definitely somewhere someone young can come in with an enthusiasm and a passion and a knowledge to come into that. What advice would you give to a young graduate that has a passion for sustainability or maybe wants to get into the aviation sector?
Just find every bit of material that you can get your hands on, and there's loads out there. There is loads out there. And compared to when I sort of started back in the sort of early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of information on aviation sustainability. Today there is, you can find it. There's plenty out there. But I think as well is network, find the right people as well, and join groups. There's so many. When I started, there was probably 1 or 2 conferences a year on aviation sustainability. There's now sort of 1 or 2 a week. So you can, and they're great things. They're great events to go to, because not only do you get the latest developments in any aspect of aviation sustainability, you get to meet people that are, and generally the people are passionate about it.
Yeah.
They feel like they're doing something valuable, and that's the big change I've seen in maybe the last 5 to 10 years, particularly with the younger generation. They love flying, they love the idea of flying, but they're a bit bit concerned, oh, do I want to go into an industry that, is seen as a heavy polluter? That's turned around now. They now see it as opportunity. Said, you know what? I think I'm convinced there are solutions here, and I want to be part of that. I want to be part of this helping. It's the new industrial revolution. 5 years ago, nobody was talking about hydrogen-powered aircraft. We've now got successful test flights of 19-seater and 50-seater hydrogen-powered aircraft. So if that can happen in the last 5 years, just think what can happen in the next 15.
Yeah.
So it's and that's the thing that I'm loving. I mean, if I just mentioned sustainable aviation fuels, we started our first project at BA in 2008, which is we were very early days, and that was some of the funny stories around. Our lead project was where we take municipal solid waste and we turn it into jet fuel. And the press articles at the time, they were slightly sort of making fun of us, so they called us Nappy Airways or Cabbage Airways or banana skin Airways, but because everyone thought tongue in cheek, this will never happen. Today, we're now seeing there's 9 plants around the world dedicated to producing sustainable aviation fuels. And between now and 2030, we expect that to be in the hundreds. So it's great to actually see it start happening.
Amazing amazing bit of advice for anyone young watching. Again, reach out. You've got platforms like LinkedIn. You've got communities growing on your social media platforms. Your university alumni and conferences. Reach out to people. Talk about this. It's something that we've constantly said in previous episodes is if you're young, you're enthusiastic, want to get in the aviation space, have a passion for sustainability, but think, I don't have the right degree, speak to a network. Build that network. A lot of this is based on passion, education, and trust. These careers, and as long as you have a degree and have the ability to consume information and produce, positive results, it doesn't matter. You could have a biomedical science degree.
Your background doesn't matter. As long as you're passionate about it and you're motivated, you'll succeed.
There you go. There's the catch line for today's episode. That's amazing. And coming on to that, backgrounds and things like that, Jonathan, I've had the pleasure of working with your team in IAG, a couple of interactions and discussions, and I've met another number of people in sustainability at conferences and stuff like that. I'm going to say out there, and maybe I'm a bit biased, but that team you have, maybe the best set of individuals I've ever met in terms of intellect, wider thinking, and doing things for the wider good. I mean, I'm talking about Lee Hudson, I'm talking about Jim Davies and Aaron Robinson, all those are so passionate, so intelligent, but they all came from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. Okay. So it makes the point, doesn't it? It makes the point. Yeah, you're right. I've known Lee, so Lee Hudson, so she's a biochemist. So she never thought when she joined an airline that she would be involved in all the chemistry to do with sustainable aviation fuels. So she feels like she's come full circle and she's absolutely loving it. And she is one of the world's superstars when it comes to sustainable aviation fuels, and particularly on the policy side. But you mentioned Jim Davis. So I've known Jim since I joined BA back in 1999. So he is a fuel buyer. So he's an engineer, aerospace engineer by background, but he led BA's fuel purchase for 25 years. So I would say he's probably the world's biggest expert when it comes to buying fuel, which is fantastic because now he leads all our sustainable aviation fuels. So he knows the oil companies extremely well. Fantastic negotiator. So he's leading all our work on negotiating SAF deals, which is great. And Aaron as well. He came from United Airlines. He led the SAF program at United Airlines. So we're very fortunate for him to join us. And then we have Michael Evans and Marina Ado, who used to work for Iberia, and Michael was carbon markets expert at S&P. And I think the common theme with all of them is their passion for the subject. We all really think this is such an important role to play. We love aviation, and we think we're making a contribution. I think that's what binds us all together, that sort of common drive.
Yeah, and to have a team like that to be doing such a noble goal and a mission is incredible to know that you're sort of back covered with sort of elite talent, which is, and it does exist in other organizations, I'm sure, but, having spent time with these people and understood every angle.
Well, thank you, Raz. Very kind.
No, my compliments to your team. I've spoken to them. But that's one aspect. So now we're getting into your job as the group head of sustainability. And this is one thing that we said on the podcast, that I'm usually talking as a person, but this time I can't let this opportunity go because I have you here. And there's one thing I want to sort of, I'll add in afterwards, but your role there, how does it work on a group front? You're talking about fuel purchasing and purchasing SAF, and there's probably other elements. How do you build a strategy for an airline or even a group? How have you gone about that? What is that for IAG?
Yes, and I think it's common when IAG was first set up in 2011. So that was the merger of BA and Iberia. There was a challenging few years to basically define the parameters between what the airlines do and what IAG does. Willie Walsh, who set it up, was very clear. Our role is to essentially create the strategy for the group. It's not delivery, it's strategy. So set the vision, and then we set the targets, and then we oversee the program management of all the key responsibilities against the key KPIs. But essentially, delivery takes place within the different airlines. So it was quite important to understand those boundaries, because what you don't want to be doing is tripping over each other. And it's fair to say, I mean, across the different airlines, they were when I first joined IAG in 2015, there were very different stages in that journey. So probably BA and Iberia were further advanced, because BA was actually the first airline in the world to have an environment team back in 1992.
Wow.
So really ahead of and it's interestingly, the main issue then was noise, not climate change.
Because of the surrounding areas.
Yeah, because of expansion at Heathrow particularly, where as we know here in near Richmond, the aircraft fly overhead, so there's a lot of people and a lot of people interested in how we mitigate the noise as far as possible. But today that has without doubt been overtaken by climate change. And then we have Vueling, and then we have Aer Lingus and Level. But I'd say today one of the things that we were very clear about is creating a network of all those people. So we've particularly the last 5 years created the sort of IAG sustainability network, because we can't do everything from the centre. While we'll try and sort of set the vision and the goals, oversee the program, and also we're responsible for the disclosure. It's making sure that the opcos are focusing on the things they need to deliver, but they're also talking to each other. Yeah. And we have monthly calls every 2 hours just to get everybody up to speed on where we're going. But I think more importantly, we have quarterly workshops. And we started those sort of 3 years ago, and it's amazing to see how that team has developed into a really close-knit community, a self-supporting, because we've just got to know each other really well. And we move around the network, so we'll do Barcelona, Madrid, Dublin, London, and that has really helped. And that has helped as well understand our role and the role of the different opcos.
And I believe the network effect is probably, it reduces a lot of workload, but again, when we come to it, loads of stakeholders, how do you deal with the policy changes? You travel to the US, your European carriers, EU, and post-Brexit out of EU, and you've got UK, you've got Asia Pacific. Everyone's got different rules. There's no global rule. And so how do you stay on top of that? It's ever changing. I've literally, over the last 6 months, I've seen it change like 3 times.
Yes, it is.
How do you stay on top of this? And how do you budget for this? How do you communicate that to your execs? Because, when you tell an exec a changing milestone or timeline every 6 months, most people would lose credibility that you said this, now it's this. How have you educated them as well? It'd be great to take
it does come down to, it sounds like a really dull subject, but governance is absolutely key, because it is a fast-changing picture. And on regulation, we sort of think about the sort of 3 levels: global, regional, national. And we know that we'll be regulated on all these 3 levels continually. Our sort of primary focus is, we're a global industry, we need global regulation. So we focus on a KO for that. So that's a key area for us, particularly when it comes to carbon pricing scheme. So we have the global carbon pricing scheme, CORSIA, the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, which has been in place since 2016. We're the only sector that has a global carbon pricing instrument. It was a compromise at the time, but everyone's agreed we need to strengthen it. So that's our priority, global regulation. And actually just 3 weeks ago, we had the first global commitment to sustainable aviation fuels from ICAO, 5% by 2030. And again, that sends a very strong signal. Then we're regional, so European regulation. So Europe is probably the most advanced part of the world in terms of climate change regulation. So what we do, we work very closely with them. We accept that regional regulation, while global regulation is being developed, there is a role for regional regulation. So things like the EU emissions trading scheme, but our view, very strongly held view across the whole industry, it should only apply for intra-European flights. So the EU have in the past tried to implement carbon policy beyond its shores, but that won't work. That's why. So we have global regulation for international, regional regulation for intra-European, and then thirdly, national regulation. So particularly when it comes to accelerating technology development. So things like sustainable aviation fuels, we will need the UK to implement supplementary regulation to support the investment in sustainable aviation fuels. So it's kind of understanding those three layers, what the priority in each of those layers are. And I mean, we don't always get what we want, but at least we've got that overall framework. We know where those bits fit. So when there's a change in one bit, we say this is where it sits versus the whole big picture.
And that makes so much sense on so many levels. But then there is one part that you mentioned there. There's a lot of commitments from industry to reach certain targets and stuff. What are IAG's interim and long-term commitments in terms of milestones? And how do you get there?
Yeah, no, indeed. It was and as I said early on, it all starts with the science. Everything has to start with the science. So our view with climate change is not what you can do, it's what you have to do, led by the science. So, and the lead scientific body is the United Nations. You know, they have a team of tens of thousands of scientists. Every 5 years, they produce their latest update on what the planet needs to do to reduce the worst effects of climate change. So the last big report was in 2018, and this is where the whole notion of net zero emissions came out. You know, to avoid a greater than 1.5 degree temperature rise, we had to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. So our view was, right, we need to commit to that. It took a year to go through all that internal governance, and that's good. That's, you know, it's not something that you should do lightly. So all of your organisation, I know there's a lot of companies will go out there and they'll commit to net zero emission 2050, but when you delve into the detail, they haven't really understood what that means. So when we made our commitment back in October 2019, a year after the UN report, you know, we had gone through a massive exercise with all our executives and our board, because we produced a roadmap. So the first question is, right, you've got this target, how are you going to deliver it? And that was the hard bit. It was developing that roadmap, having all the different elements in there, describing our picture of how we thought we could deliver it. And that was that's what enabled us to convince, you know, all our leaders in our organization that this is deliverable. But I think the additional important point that it's not just about IAG. You know, for IAG committing is very much just the start point. We will only address this challenge if we do it at a sector level. So it was very much so the plan that we took to our management committee and then the board was IAG first, then we'll convince our global alliance, One World, then we'll convince our global industry association, IATA, and then IATA will convince ICAO.
So a chain effect.
It's a chain effect. And ultimately, you have to get to our global regulator, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. They're the people that regulate us. So we had a timeline of how long we thought it would take from our commitment to get the ICAO commitment. We thought it would probably take 6 years based on the experience we saw with Corsia. That was first thought of back in 2009, and it took to 2016 to get agreement. But we were very pleasantly surprised. A year after our commitment, One World committed. So that's the 14 airlines representing 20% of global aviation. Once One World had committed, it was a relatively straightforward step to get IATA to commit, and it helped a lot that Willie Walsh was the Director General of IATA. So that was in 2021. And then the following year, ICAO committed. So actually in a space of 3 years, you've gone from one airline to the whole industry, an airline level and a government level have made the same commitment.
So, and there's a controversial question, and we do this on the podcast. I ask the direct questions, is in the grand scheme of things, aviation is such a minimal percentage.
Right.
If it stopped, as it did, the temperature of the world still rises.
Right.
How does that make you feel? That you having to go through this pain, aggravation. I get it. We all have to contribute to the world and stuff. But such a nominal percentage where possibly others aren't moving, that are a larger percentage, and you're having to giving your time and sacrifice in that area.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that, and how do you sell that to your board and your stakeholders?
So we say we are 2% of global emissions, but that's 1 billion tons of CO2. Actually, 2% is a lot when you think about all of the sectors that are involved. The main issue for us is going to take us longer to develop the solutions. So most other sectors already have the solutions to start their downward trajectory towards net zero. Us, it's probably going to take 10 years before we start to that curve to bend down. So we will be producing 1 billion tons of CO per year for probably the next decade. And then our percentage of the total volume will go up because the rest of the world is decreasing. And as the target says, we've all got to achieve net zero emissions. So that's basically zero by 2050. So we've got to, I don't believe it's going to go much above the 1 billion tons a year, but we've got to get that 1 billion tons down to zero. So because we have to play our part, as every sector has to play their part. So even though we're only 2%, depends who you talk to. Some believe, depending on the relative success of the other sectors, we could be sort of 15 to 20% by the mid-2030s, late 2030s. But the quicker we can get on that downward trajectory, the quicker we can sort of make sure that we don't go above any of these higher forecast levels.
It's fascinating because you're reliant on the other sectors that are actually heavy polluters now to produce outcomes or technology or things for you so you can reduce. So it's very chicken and egg. So you're waiting, but you are taking steps.
It's a system-wide approach, and that's the thing that we really have to focus on when we talk to regulators, that we will need access to renewable electricity, for instance, to produce the sort of third generation sustainable aviation fuels, where we take carbon from the atmosphere and we mix it with green hydrogen. We will also, we'll need access to that green hydrogen as well. So the hydrogen economy, I think, will play a key role, as much for other sectors as well as our own. So we need governments to put incentives in place to really develop, particularly the infrastructure on hydrogen. So, you can produce the plants to develop the hydrogen, but it's actually getting it distributed to the places where you need it. So there's lots of sort of system-wide enablers to enable us to reduce our emissions along with every other sector.
There's so much I want to unpack from that bit there. We're talking about the fuels first. So talk to me like I'm a child now. So the three generations of fuels, as it were. So the one that you can get really fast.
Yeah, and it's the one that exists today. So basically it's taking waste oils. We could use cooking oil, fats and greases. So that technology, essentially you can use today's refining capability. Mm-hmm. You just put in this different feedstock and that will generate sort of low carbon sustainable aviation fuels. The challenge for us is the amount of that feedstock is relatively limited. I mean, top end, it's anywhere between 10 and 20% of our fuels could be on these first generation fuels, but they're really important to transition because we can do them today. So in the UK, there's only one plant producing sustainable aviation fuels, Phillips 66 on Humberside, and that is used cooking oil. So it's really important to help us start that journey, but second generation, really important. So there's two main pathways there. One is the municipal solid waste I mentioned earlier. So that literally takes regular household waste, agricultural waste, industrial waste, converts it, two-stage process, converts that into jet fuel. Now that's more complicated technology. It's gasification and a technology called Fischer-Tropsch, which has been around a long time, but not to produce jet fuel. So it's a unique application of that technology. There's a couple of plants around the world that have reached production, so they've gone through demonstration and they are starting to produce those fuels. But that's the pathway, along with the alcohol to jet. Takes waste biomass and converts that to jet. Those two pathways for second generation, they will be the mainstay of sustainable aviation fuels for the next 10 to 15 years. And we think still up to 2050, probably 40 to 50% of all fuels by then will be on those 2G fuels. Yeah. And then third one is the third G, what we often call power to liquids or ESAF. ESAF is basically where you take carbon dioxide captured from the atmosphere, you mix it with green hydrogen, create sustainable fuel. So the ultimate, if you like, sustainable fuel, 100% lower carbon emissions than jet fuel, but that will take longer, mainly because of the carbon capture technology is very early stage at the moment. So that will take probably 10 years before we're looking at that at a commercial scale. But from 2035, we'll start to see that ramp up, and again by 2050, our current view is sort of 50% eSAF, 40% will be 2G, municipal solid waste and alcohol to jet, and then that final 10% will be on the fuels that we are using today, the first generation.
Fossil-based ones. Yeah. God. Well, we're going to come to this question of challenges, but just on that, 1G, as you want to brand it, the ones from cooking oil, there's a lot of chips that people are going to have to fry to give you that output. There's only so many you can do, yeah?
Exactly.
So that's a limited lifestyle, and I'm sure it's not the easiest thing or the pleasant thing to produce. So I'm guessing there's going to be a cap on how long you can use that fuel for, but it helps in the interim.
Exactly.
The 2G, as you described, alcohol to jet and municipal waste, while noble in the sense of producing fuel from a waste, and waste is increasing as populations increase.
Indeed. That would otherwise go to landfill.
Yeah.
So you're solving two problems with the MSW.
So pathway. I can see that as a great case. The eSAF, I mean, on paper sounds fantastic. Scientifically sounds fantastic. Practicality, okay. Two questions to you. Green hydrogen is going to take a lot of energy to produce.
Right.
The raw materials, you're going to be competing against the likes of electric cars and things like that to build electrolyzers, the raw metal work and stuff like that. That has its own carbon footprint of going through mines and mining that up. So there's a whole supply chain. It's blowing my mind even thinking about this right now.
Indeed.
And then it comes back to that question, what gives us the right in aviation to get access to green hydrogen first when you've got higher energy demanding areas like steel production, ammonia production, things like that?
Yes, no, it's a really good point. And we don't create sort of special case for aviation. We say, we just want our fair access to some of these technologies. And the key is renewable energy. You can't, green hydrogen will not be lower carbon unless you have a very high level of renewable energy. As you say, because it's basically electrolysis of water, which takes a lot of energy. So the rule of thumb that we use is you need 70% renewable energy in your grid mix before green hydrogen starts to work. So that's one of the key asks for governments is make sure that you are developing this renewable energy sector, and that's for everybody. Nobody's going to get access to that green hydrogen. The one message we do give to governments, though, is they have to recognise that in aviation we have very few alternatives, just because the physics are flying. Yeah. What we do is quite unique and it takes a lot of energy. So we need solutions that have massive energy density. Yeah, and that's why SAF is so critical, and therefore, and for governments to not to say we'll reserve all of this for aviation, but just recognise that constraint where other industries do have solutions, and so the whole SAF market is a good example of that. So initially, governments looked at biofuels for ground transport vehicles. I think in retrospect, they recognised that actually what they should have done is probably gone electric earlier. Because and that's exactly what we're seeing now happen certainly with domestic and small vehicles, is the notion that they should go towards electric rather than use biofuels. And actually what they should have done is allocated those scarce resources to the aviation sector. But hey, we're all learning in this journey. It's happening now, and they are creating the right policies to recognise that they've got to allocate these scarce resources to those sectors that have limited solutions.
And that brings me perfectly onto the next point is, and we've touched on them, and we want to probably dive into them. Is so you've got this plan of net zero by 2050, objective goal as you want to go, and you believe you have the pathway to get there, and how you would and what you would use, and how that's broken up. What are the key risks and challenges along that journey? So key risks and challenges. What are those?
Yeah, I'd say it's policy support, and it's just a snapshot. Our roadmaps they're like a dynamic, living depiction of what we think, and they're constantly changing. I guess the important thing is there's no one solution, and that's really important, particularly for our key stakeholders, our investors. They don't like silver bullets, because that feels like risk. So that's why we believe we talk about the 4-pillar strategy. So operational efficiencies, new aircraft and engine technology, including hydrogen-powered aircraft, sustainable aviation fuels. We recognise by 2050 we won't be able to get to absolute zero emissions, so we will have to invest in sort of carbon reductions outside of our sector. Currently that's offsets and emission trading schemes, but ultimately we want to get to carbon removals. So we have this sort of 4-pillar, and what we do constantly, depending on progress we see with the development of those technologies and also policy advancement, we tweak the relative proportions of those different, those different wedges, if you like, and that's generally the approach everybody across the industry takes. None of it will happen though without policy support, and that's absolutely clear. And it's not aviation saying that. Every single new energy industry has required policy support just to get it started, not to maintain it. We see it as just you need policy support in that transition to get the new energy developed. Once it's up and running, it won't need that policy support. And I think Bill Gates has I don't know if you've his book How to Avoid, and this is recommendation for anybody that wants a sort of relative, very well written summary of the problem. How to avoid a climate crisis, and he puts it very eloquently. He says, we are in an energy transition, and if you look back at the previous transitions from coal to oil to gas, each of those has taken 60 years.
Yeah.
We don't have 60 years. So for us moving to new energy solutions for aviation, at best we've got 20. So how do you shrink that lead time to get those solutions in its policy support?
So if I ask you the question of, I have a government official sitting right here, you're
Yes.
able to communicate and say, this is what I would require or I would aspire you to look to. What would those key points be? Where would you need that policy support?
Yeah, so sustainable aviation fuels is overall we need a carbon pricing scheme because that basically incentivizes all technologies. And so we've got that through a mix of our global scheme, Corsia, and also emissions trading schemes in Europe and the UK. So that's fine. We've got those policies. We're always asking them to be tweaked and to incentivize different solutions. But I guess the most important is the direct incentives for specific technologies. And the one I'm talking about is sustainable aviation fuels. So it is now recognized globally that this will play a very significant part in the decarbonisation of aviation. And that's something, as I say, when we started our first project in 2008, there was probably maybe 3 or 4 airlines in the world thinking about SAF. Today, everybody believes this will play probably the single most important role. Anywhere between 50 and 70% of our fuels will be SAF by 2050, and governments have recognised that. So hence that's why we have mandates in the UK and Europe, and the US have made big moves as well. But essentially, that we always talk about the 3 components. We need a demand signal, for users, make sure that the airlines are going to use this stuff. So the UK and Europe have gone down the mandate route, which is fine. So
mandating a certain percentage of use by a certain date.
Yeah, exactly. So the EU have by 2030 it's 6% SAF use, but it ramps up quite quickly. So it goes to 20% by 2035, and ultimately 70% by 2050. So relatively shallow start, but it does ramp up quickly. The UK have taken a probably more aggressive line in the earlier years, 10%. By 2030, which is 1.2 million tons of SAF. Now, bearing in mind the entire global supply this year is probably 250,000 tons. The UK alone is saying we're going to need 5 times that by 2030. So that's all fine, and we support that ambition. We think, but the key to unlocking that is creating incentives to attract the investment. So that's the second piece. So that's where the Jet Zero Council has been very helpful. So that's that partnership between government and industry established in the UK in 2020 to accelerate solutions, and it's split between 2 groups. We have a zero emission flight group and we have the SAF group. So I chair the SAF delivery group of the Jet Zero Council. And we've had, I'd think probably 70 workshops in the last 4 years, helping government develop the right policy to attract the investment. So the UK has gone down the mandate route, which is fantastic. We expect to see that in legislation next year. And just earlier this year, they have committed to basically an incentive scheme to attract the funds to get these plants built. So we hope to see that in legislation within the next 12, 24 months.
So mandate, you mentioned mandate, which is basically a required amount that needs to be reached by an acquired date.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the EU, that is planes landing and taking off in the EU or flying over?
So the mandate is on the fuel supplier. So as any fuel that is uplifted in the EU must contain for instance, 2030, 6% sustainable aviation fuels.
But
So
what
it's
if I fly a
on track.
full jet with enough to go back and forth?
Well, I mean, that is a risk that because
Oh, so
the
there is the
SAF
capability of doing that.
you can do it. We call it tankering in the industry.
That
So,
doesn't
and
help.
it does happen. It does happen. The economics are. It happens much less now because, if you think it's particularly on long haul, because if you're carrying all that extra weight, you have to carry fuel to carry the fuel.
Yeah.
And actually, for long haul flights,
Doesn't
it's not a because you're already sort of maxed out on how much fuel you can carry. So the ability to, if you think a long haul flight's got to carry fuel for both ways, that very rarely happens because you're just not going to have that capacity to do that. And with carbon pricing as well, so not only you're paying for the extra fuel, but you're paying for the carbon on the fuel as well. But that said, the government, the EU, have introduced regulations to prevent tankering.
Okay.
So they have actually recognised that as a risk. So essentially, what they've said is that you will have to pick up at least 90% of your regular uplift, and they'll determine what that is. So for a 777 on a New York to Paris flight, they will have worked out, this is how much we expect you to pick up for that flight. You will be required to pick up 90% of that to try and avoid some of those what we call it carbon leakage, where people try to avoid carbon regulation, and then do so and create additional carbon emissions. But actually, when you look at the economics, we think the risk is pretty low.
But then that brings me on to what's to do nothing. Okay, I have this mandate. I could be from a different region. I'm not a European airline. This isn't I'm going to do what I've always done. What is the impact on?
Well, it's on the fuel
someone who takes that
suppliers.
decision?
It's on the fuel suppliers, and if they don't provide the fuel, they have to pay a penalty. We call it the buyout. So, and because the government's recognised actually there might just not be enough fuel available, so we have to create this pressure valve. Now, the buyout in Europe is very punitive. So essentially what they've done is they said, look, we'll choose a market price for SAF, one of the challenges it'll have. But let's say typically today, SAF is anywhere between 3 and 5 times jet. So if I do some round numbers, jet fuel, $1,000 a ton. SAF, let's say it's $3,000 a ton. So the current mechanism in the EU is so that difference is $2,000 a ton. The buyout will be twice that difference added to the jet fuel price. So if you can't provide me that SAF, you're going to pay a $5,000 buyout penalty.
Wow.
So that creates incentive. And the reason they've done that is nobody wants to pay the buyout.
Yeah.
It creates even further incentive for those companies to invest in the capacity to produce the fuel. So it's deliberately made quite punitive to create an even stronger incentive. Because what we want at the end of the day, we don't want companies paying buyouts because they'll pass that on to the consumer anyway. And so airfares are going to go up.
Yeah.
We want people to produce the SAF. So, and it's a careful balance. It is a careful balance because you have to set those mandates of what you think is realistically possible in terms of delivery of that SAF volume.
But you're saying that comes in 2025, 26?
Yeah, 2025 starts very low, relatively low. It's 2%. 2% mandates from 2025.
But if you take that with global demand, the level of SAF being produced now, it's surely a fire sale of everyone trying to buy SAF.
Well, we think but the 2% is achievable. So there's enough 1G SAF to meet that 2%.
But when does 1G get phased out?
Well, it's in the EU. There is no so each
date.
region there's no HEPA cap.
Okay.
There's no 1G cap. So because it's such a bigger market, they recognise that you can't start. And one of the big challenges for governments is: do I pick technology winners, or do I create a generic incentive to give every pathway an opportunity, or do I start to try and pick winners? And the EU have generally gone down the route, we'll create the incentive for all SAF opportunities, which is slightly different to the route the UK have done. But we are seeing there's a lot of SAF plants being designed and developed here in Europe, so we should see, all going well, about 30 SAF plants by 2030. But the place where it's happening the fastest is the US. So, I mean, they have the very significant benefit. They have very attractive state policies, particularly California and now Washington, Illinois, Oregon. But they also have federal incentives, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act. And if you're in the US, you get both. So
Wow.
they stack them. So it's without, there's no coincidence that 90% of the investment in sustainable aviation fuels capacity is taking place in the States, because that's where it's most attractive. So the likelihood is what will happen in the UK, because the interesting, there's no carbon pricing vehicle in the US.
Yeah.
So there's no incentive for airlines to buy. There's no mandate.
Yeah.
There's no carbon pricing.
Yeah.
So there's producer incentives. There's a lot of activity to producing SAF, but there's no incentive on the airlines to buy it. So the current picture is it'll likely be that the biggest incentive on airlines is in Europe and the UK, and we'll be importing it from the US. So that will be the early picture.
But is that not counterintuitive? That you creating an environment in Europe where you're going to have to get this finite resource, and you get it from a region that you have to ship it over, or do you fly it?
Indeed. I think we do it today. Okay. I mean, there's global, jet fuel is supplied all over the world. It's interesting that we ship this, so we don't carry it on planes. We put it in cargo ships, and actually the carbon footprint of shipping bulk goods is less than 0.1%. So actually, it doesn't affect the carbon very much. But that said, we would much rather have that production capacity here in the EU. We just think that it will take slightly longer, particularly on the 2G SAF. So here in the UK, we know that we have very low feedstock availability and capacity to do 1G SAF, very limited. So the government is very much focused on incentivizing 2G SAF. Now, 2G SAF that's the municipal solid waste and alcohol to jet. It's very more capex intense. It takes a lot, so it'll take longer to get those plants built. So in that transition, you'll probably see more imported heifer to meet the requirements of the mandates here in the UK.
Wow. I mean, that segment there, I mean, we've just covered literally 101 sustainability, your challenges, your everything. I think it's blown my mind. There's so many stakeholders involved. And coming to the point of SAF, and this is my belief that, why is it the airline that has to put the pressure to buy or to get the fuel so it can operate?
Right.
And it's not, why are the oil majors or anything not pushing this? My theory is that, it goes bigger than just the carbon footprint and all this stuff. The US dollar runs, they're called the petrodollar, right? If you're going to be using a different feedstock to start producing a fuel that potentially runs the world, that has economic effects on currency, because you stop trading in that, right? And it's not backed by that anymore. Do you think that's one of the biggest challenges that people are starting to, in the background, trying to figure out what is next?
Yes, absolutely. And SAF, it is absolutely clear that the oil companies have been very slow to the party when it comes to sustainable aviation fuels. I mean, they produce jet fuel. Airlines shouldn't be down to airlines to invest in these companies. And it is clear that part of the problem for the oil companies, one, they make massive profits on jet fuel. There's probably, if you look at the sort of segment of the barrel, the margins on jet are very attractive. And secondly, the risk of investing in a SAF plant is way outside their internal rate of returns. Typically they'll be earning 20 to 30% on any of their sort of oil and gas activity. You look at a SAF project, you're likely to get 10%.
Yeah.
So you can imagine quite difficult to build that business case around. So I want to invest in this SAF plant. It's much riskier than my core business, and two, it cannibalizes one of my most profitable segments. So you can see how that dynamic is challenging for the oil companies. This is where mandates work, though, because you can't ignore a mandate. The mandate is on the supplier. You have to supply, and that's why we see them as quite effective of bringing the oil industry to the party to create these fuels. So ultimately, it'll only be the oil companies that will have the balance sheets and the financial muscle to scale up the SAF industry. And to be fair, they are starting to invest significant funds into SAF plants, both in Europe and around the world, because to meet the requirements of the mandates. So that's where the mandates are effective.
Fantastic. And then I guess the question I ask now is, there are a lot of aviation companies, airlines, groups doing lots of great things, not just buying and procuring SAF, but they are creating funds now where they fund research and development. You'll see Emirates, you'll see United.
Yes.
What are IAG doing? You don't hear much about IAG. What are you doing in the background?
Yeah, and IG's had this, I think it's one of the original sort of innovation incubators, like with their Hangar 51 program, and they've been very active, and you've been sort of close to that. And I think what I like about IAG is we tend not to shout too much about what we're doing until we can fully substantiate it. And I think that's right, because one of the big risks we have in the industry is there's a lot of greenwash going on.
So yeah, we're going to come to that.
A lot of companies saying stuff that they can't substantiate. We're the opposite. We will only do it when we're absolutely clear that we can substantiate it, and there's strong evidence that it will deliver. And I think the same goes with our Hangar 51 program, where we've made some fantastic, early discoveries around potential zero AVIA, for instance, a few carbon capture companies that we're involved in, and a few power to liquid companies that we hope to announce in the near future. And it's through that has given us that ability to find these companies. One of the things that really impresses me is about how many startup organizations out there are thinking about and seriously developing solutions to this problem, and Hangar 51 has enabled us to find those.
Yeah, and that's the sort of pitch I'd give to any airline, is that innovation arm is coupled to sustainability very closely, because you need those people to go find that talent, that raw talent that is hiding away in a garage doing chemical experiments to come up with this
exactly.
Because it's if I go through the customer journey in an IAG stroke, even just focusing on BA, for example, your online booking, when you're booking your flight, you have the option to offset. And I think it's called the Collaborate platform with a great company called Choose. And then once you've booked that, by that you can offset your emissions, contribute to SAF. There's so many different options, and invest in projects that help the environment. So you're able to do that on a platform. Then you go to the airport, and that's one opportunity, because you don't really control the transport someone uses. They can use an Uber, they can use their own car, or anything like that. There's a bit of a gap there where you could possibly offer a carbon-free electric vehicle that takes you to the plane. So you focus on the whole sector. During the airport check-in, usually you've got your phone and you've got your boarding pass on there. Sometimes you have to print. If we can slightly move away from that, you start going slightly more greener through the airport, and it's the airport's responsibility of how they power that. You go on to the jetty and to the plane, pre-conditioned air, using electricity and renewable electricity, not from the plane, burning the plane. The motor talk found by your innovation department, the electrical pushback, where you have a robotic pushback of the plane, the single engine taxi.
Exactly.
So you see how from the whole customer journey, there's actions been taken, and there are solutions.
A whole end to end, as you say.
It's quite fascinating. I think there's people working on great stuff, and it's refreshing to see large companies and corporates like yourself willing to back small 5 to 10 to 20, 30 people startups to work with them, because that didn't exist before. A corporate would only work with a large corporate because they had, but those large corporates don't move fast enough, quite frankly, and you need to disrupt that.
And it's what I've seen is transformation of the, and it's our management committee and our board have had to think differently. So I think big corporates like IAG and any other airline, they're relatively risk averse, because your job is you've got to buy planes and you've got to fill them, and that's certain. And we've been doing that for 80 years. We know how to do that, and the risk was a new plane. It's slightly different to the climate change, completely different approach to risk. We're going to have to get involved in some companies that, so for instance, investing in sustainable aviation fuel plants. They're going, we don't produce fuel. Why am I buying into a SAF company or this other technology? So for instance, we're looking at some fairly significant investments in carbon capture. And this is way outside the sort of comfort zone of any airline executive team or board. But I think they've been on that journey, and they now recognise that if we don't do that, we're not going to get the solutions. So that's the exciting thing, is that I think airlines have become, in the aviation value chain, the most exciting place to work, because it's us that's got to help nurture all these different solutions, right from TRL, technology readiness level 1, right up to 9. And we've seen the success of a dozen of these companies that literally did start in a garage that are now actually producing solutions, helping to reduce our emissions. So that's where it is a very exciting area to work in.
And it's a great point. And to add on there's so many exciting companies. Is there a couple that stand out as names that you are either working with or have noticed out in industry, met in conferences that have really something really exciting tech? You know, a sort of
Yes.
quick five that you have?
Yeah, there are so many. I'm trying to rack through my brains which one we've gone publicly, but the area I mostly work in is in sustainable aviation fuels, and that to see how quickly that has grown. So there's one company, LanzaJet. You know, LanzaJet, LanzaTech, I'd say without doubt the world's leading SAF company. And just in January next year, they will open the world's first dedicated alcohol-to-jet plant in Georgia, in the US.
Amazing.
That is really exciting for us because, you know, it's the journey. As I say, it's been a 15-year journey, and to see a plant whose sole function is to produce sustainable aviation fuels is, and once you've built the first one, the others will come pretty quickly. So we've got a project, a LanzaJet project here in the UK, coupled with a company called Nova Pangaea, which again is a amazing company. It takes waste biomass, and through this process, it creates bioethanol that then becomes the feedstock for the LanzaJet alcohol-to-jet SAF plant. But it also produces something called biochar, which is a sort of co-product that you can use to help agriculture, help improve the yields that you can achieve through agriculture. And it stores the carbon from the waste biomass in the ground. So it's a sort of nature-based version of carbon capture. So this SAF project has already got elements of carbon capture in it. So those two, they sort of stand out. We're also working, I can't mention the name. Hopefully we'll be able to announce it in the new year, but it's going to be the world's first commercial scale power to liquid company. Wow. So now we always thought power to liquids are 10 to 15 years away. We're actually working with a company, it's in the US, that, you know, they're looking at getting up to commercial scale within the next 5 years. So that's game changing. Yeah, that's amazing. Carbon capture with green hydrogen. So that was really exciting because all our roadmaps didn't really have that starting to make an inroads into our plans till about 2035. So that's already come forward 5 years. So that's I'm where we were. I look back at where we were in 2010, then 2015. Very, very slow. You know, virtually no SAF. So we first SAF project in 2008. No SAF started being produced till about 2018, so it's like 5,000 tons, and then now 2023 is 250,000 tons. We expect it to get to 1 million tons globally by 2025, and, you know, with the right policy support, that could easily become 20 million tons a year by 2030.
Wow!
So we are the very exciting growth phase of these solutions.
And there's other great companies that you work with. I think Zero Avia, who are doing some fantastic stuff.
Hydrogen fuel cell company, and I think. Fair to say, the world's leading hydrogen fuel cell organisation here in the UK, which is so they're UK-US, but they've got a base at Cotswold Airport. So they're 19-seater, Dornier 228. It just completed its first trials of 10 flights. So, and as I say, 5 years, nobody even dreamt of talking about hydrogen-powered aircraft. Yeah. We now have an aircraft that has succeeded in completing its first set of trials, and that could be in service within the next 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
So it's amazing.
Exciting times,
yeah. So that's why I say the big shift I've seen is people actually want to get into this industry because they now say, rather than, it's a bit of a problem, it's a polluter. Actually, it's a place where there's a lot of exciting, interesting jobs taking place, and I want to be part of that.
Amazing. And, there are definitely, there is good news going around. There is some great stuff that we've done and achieved in the industry. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you had the first 100% SAF powered flight by Virgin Atlantic. So great job. It's a company I've previously worked for. Some really great people. But, I do... when I watched it, I was, happy that that's being done. I do slightly add the caveat that, I don't want it to be misconstrued that, SAF is readily available for everyone to run 100% jet fuel, because it's not. But it was a great demonstrator for someone to be able to show what was in the art of possible. Great coverage and a lot of government attention, which hopefully prompts a lot of people in the supply chain to say, there's a possibility here.
There's a solution here.
Yes, and there's a solution we can work towards. But it is that caveat to always add that it isn't a readily available resource.
No,
it's finite.
We thought we're very supportive. One of the things is to convince, and generally, there's quite a lot of cynicism around corporate claims on climate change. It always seems to be sort of jam tomorrow, and we talked about greenwashing. But I think the benefit of that flight is it said, no, it is available today and it's safe.
Yeah.
SAF is safe, because one of the questions you get, but is it okay to fly on these aircraft with these new fuels? That was a clear demonstration. No, it's safe. We know SAF works.
Yeah.
And actually, there have been 750,000 flights on sustainable aviation fuels, so we know it works.
Yeah.
And the quicker we can get
Testing's
to the 100% is so we know it works, and we know it's sustainable. The challenge we've got now is commercial scale up. And there's, as you say, I mean, even though it was 250,000 tonnes this year, that's still 0.1% of our fuel. So our absolute laser focus is support the commercial scale up. We just need more SAF plants, and we need them, fast.
Fantastic. I think you've literally blown my mind, and we've had such an intellectual conversation. I think it's a great thing. So the next part we sort of cover is the what's next, the future, and then we'll end with our very famous and very popular quickfire round, sustainability edition for you, especially.
Yes.
But so, what's next in your journey now? So you are in the procurement of SAF. You're working to your 4-pillar strategy, as you mentioned.
Yes.
That's ever evolving, ever changing with the changing world, policies, economic climate, all that sort of stuff going on.
Yeah.
What is or you can tell us now your journey to 2030 and your 10% cap. What does that look like? What is it based on? How do you attack that? And then the 2050, what would help along that journey? Where would you need the supply chain to aid you in that, and the sort of risks and challenges along that?
Yeah. So very much so. The way I describe it is the previous decade was all about the commitment phase, making sure that we as an industry have made the right commitments. So that was the net zero emissions by 2050. This decade is all about delivery. Complete focus on we have got to, as an industry, start reducing our emissions this decade, because every other sector is. And we don't want to be the industry that's still increasing, or even plateauing our emissions when everybody else is reducing. And the primary opportunity to do that is sustainable aviation fuels, which is why at IAG, we take responsibility at the centre for procuring SAF, because we see it as the biggest strategic opportunity in the climate change agenda is accelerate the production of SAF, which is why we set the 10% target. That was an interesting, so we set that in 2021. 10% in 2030 is 1 million tonnes a year for us. The global supply of SAF in 2021 was 100,000 tonnes. So you can imagine the conversation we had at our board. You want us to commit to 10 times the global volume today just for one company? We said, yep. How? But we gave them able to show them roadmap. This is all the momentum. This is all the regulation we're seeing. These are all the planned plants that come online. They said, okay, we get that. So that's for us very much the priority. For me, a lot of people say, well, yeah, but 10%. It's only 10%. What about the remaining 90%? The key, the hardest, the first 10% is by far and away the hardest. Once you've got to 10%, the rest will happen. Because basically you've proven the technology and you've created the business case. Yeah. So once you get to 10%, the rest will follow. So that's our sort of kind of laser focus. The other one is carbon removals. So we as an industry are probably one of 2 sectors that are going to depend on carbon removal technology to reduce our residual emissions to get to net zero in 2050. That's us and agriculture. So we have a vested interest in making sure that market develops quickly. So we're doing currently a lot of policy work. We're talking to startups through our innovation hub, but they're very, very early stage, typically TRL 1 to 3. So how do we get them to sort of commercial scale more quickly? But again, it's in the policy arena, because currently, if I go and buy a carbon removal, type credit, I get no benefit of that through our carbon pricing vehicles like emissions trading. Our emissions trading scheme don't recognise carbon removals. So that's our priority. Get it recognised within our policy instruments, and that'll send the signal to develop the market. And then all the other technology we talked about, but that's largely going to be with the aircraft manufacturers, so the hydrogen-powered aircraft, hybrid electric, but continue to support that where we can. We think that, next generation aircraft will play a big role. The disruptive technologies, probably they'll take a bit longer. So we expect the first narrow-body hydrogen-powered aircraft, say, mid-2030s, particularly with the Airbus Zero E program. but it won't start having an impact because of the fleet replacement cycles to the mid-2040s. So I view between 5 and 10% of our emissions in 2050. So we need everything. This decade, it's all about SAF, and then beyond that, it's carbon capture technology, and then those disruptive technologies.
Amazing. I mean, I commend you for the thought, the process, selling this to a board of a number of unknowns. It's amazing. So if anyone out there is doing that, and hats off to you. But then, Jonathan, I'd ask for anyone who's struggling to do that, what is your 1 or 2 minute pitch that you would give and advise them to how to pitch to their C-level of the change that's needed?
Look at what everybody else is doing, some of the leading companies in the sector, and we're more than happy. Our view is this is a sector problem. So we don't hide what we're doing, because we want everybody to benefit from the journey we've been through, and hopefully do it quicker than we have. So being the first is always a challenge, but we very much see our role is to support everybody else in that journey. We're happy to share all the material. We have open facilities to all our roadmaps and all our discussions with our boards and our regulators and so on. So very happy to do that if anybody's specifically interested. But talk to those in the industry that are on this journey and learn from them.
Fantastic, and what a sort of great way to bring an end to that. This segment here, and what we'll do is we'll pop the details for contacting Jonathon on LinkedIn in the description for you. Again, take this opportunity. Like I said, we have literally sustainability royalty in the house here. He'll again just explained literally from start to finish the journey, the challenges, the risks, and the roadmap ahead. So Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been great to talk to you.
It's been amazing. And so what we're going to do now is I'll let you have 1 minute to prepare. I'm going to get my list of questions. This is a quick fire round that we start off. And how we go about it is I'm going to give you a couple of quick questions, and you just need to give a 1-word response.
Yep.
After that, you can extend those responses, because we'll go into a bit more detail on those questions, but as fast as you can. So let me know when you're ready.
Sure.
And we'll fire away.
I'm ready.
Okay. Chicken or beef?
Chicken.
Aisle or window?
Window.
Favorite aircraft type?
Tricky question. Favorite aircraft type? I do like the A380.
I do too, actually. I do too. Favorite airline?
I like all the IG airlines. But I guess in my career I've flown most with British Airways, so yeah. But I like them all.
Favorite airport?
That is a very good question. I actually like Heathrow Terminal 5.
Yeah, I was one of very few that do that.
I was very closely involved with it. So when I started at British Airways, when we had Terminal 1 and Terminal 4, I mean, anybody that remembers those days, Terminal 5 transformed British Airways, and it's such a beautiful building. So yeah, I still have a very soft spot for Terminal 5.
If you could sit next to anyone on an aircraft on a long haul flight, who would it be and why?
Do they have to be alive?
No, they don't.
No. So I am massive interest in military history. So Winston Churchill is one of my big heroes. Yeah, and he's written a book called The Second World War. And 6 volumes, and anybody interested in it, you have to read it. And sometimes I think that was probably the biggest previous global challenge we've had to face as a global community. And I think there's some interesting lessons for addressing climate change. But the main thing is collaboration. We need to work together on this one.
What question would you ask him?
How did you get through some of those very dark moments? Did you ever think that you're going to prevail?
Wow.
It was that how did you support yourself through? And there were some pretty dark moments in that journey for him.
Strangest in-flight experience you've had?
So this is so I used to be a management consultant, and I was doing some work for Gulf Air. Now in the Gulf they have they love flying eagles or birds of prey. So I was fortunate to be coming back from Bahrain in first class, but the CSD said to me, "We've got somebody that is going to be a passenger next to you," and it was a huge hooded falcon. So I was in the window seat, and next to me, and they're on a perch, but they're hooded. So effectively, they're asleep. But
Oh my God.
I have to say, I didn't sleep much to that flight. I was sitting next to a bird of prey, but there you go.
There you go. So you got an eagle or a bird of prey on one side, hopefully Winston Churchill on another in your dream
Exactly.
flight.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. What is your earliest aviation memory?
So my first flight, it was in 1976. It was Laker Airways, and it was from Gatwick to Palma. So my family went to New York for a holiday, and Freddie Laker came on the flight. So I was just 14, and I was blown away.
Wow.
I know, and I knew. I think that was the start of aviation getting in my blood. So,
And thing that inspires you the most about aviation and travel?
I just think, I love the collaboration. I love the way we work together as a sector, but I love the way that we find solutions to problems, and we're seeing it now with climate change. And it's quite different. I have worked in other sectors that don't quite have that spirit of collaboration that takes. Obviously, we compete tooth and nail when it comes to the commercial side of the business, but when there is an industry challenge, and say historically it's been on safety, and now it's with climate change, there is a fantastic community of sustainable aviation people where we're like a family. We're all in it together.
One aviation myth you'd like to debunk?
Aviation myth, blimey, yeah, that's a tough one. What is an aviation myth? There's an interesting one around non-CO2 emissions. I'll talk about that very briefly. So this is contrails. Yeah. So these are the white streaks you see up in the sky.
In the cloud, yeah.
Yeah. And now there is this myth that these create twice as much global warming, climate change effect of CO2, and that is very much a misrepresentation of the truth, because while they do have an effect in the 1 year, unlike CO2 lasts for 10,000 years. So I think that's a big distortion of the truth. The interesting thing, though, for anybody just to understand the problem is daytime contrails, so the ones they are climate cooling. They reduce the effect of climate change because they reflect more sunlight than heat they trap. It's the nighttime contrails. So that so a lot of people are now coming to me and saying that we don't need to worry about CO2, we need to worry about the non-CO2, and that's while we do, it's a different problem, and I think saying it's twice as dangerous as CO2 is a myth. Yeah.
A common sustainability myth that you debunk, other than the contrails?
Well, I think this. I know we hear a lot, and we talked about it today, where people say we're only 2%. I think it's just really worth considering that 2% is a lot. It's 1 billion tons, and I think it's the risk of percentages. Because you think about the whole global economy. If you're a percentage point of CO2, you're a lot. Yeah, and 2% and say it's 1 billion tons of CO2, it's a lot. So it's for people to say that. We deliberately took the decision 15 years ago. We will never say we're only 2%. We're 2%. And actually, while it sounds like it's 1/50th of global emissions, it's 1 billion tons a year. So it's serious.
Jonathon Counsell's greatest achievement?
That is a challenge. I think I would say, and it was obviously with a great team at IAG, was the commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 in 2019, ahead of the rest of the industry. And then, importantly, supporting the rest of the industry to agree the same within 3 years. I think that's probably IAG's single biggest contribution towards aviation climate change.
And hopefully to the world, I think.
Right.
And the future generations. So we can travel openly, they can travel openly with a clear conscience and a beautiful world to see, because there's great things to see in this world. Jonathon, what a way to end. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
You have educated me, inspired me, and probably everyone listening. It was great to hear about the great work that you're doing, your great team, the future, and the journey that you're taking. Amazing. Do stay in touch. Again, to all our listeners, I will put Jonathon's details in the description. Reach out, have a conversation. He's available to you on LinkedIn. He'll be at conferences you hear. it's via those mechanisms, being able to articulate, have the conversation and learning, do we grow? And that's what we're all about. And bringing you this and bringing you great people like Jonathon. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Raza. And very happy to continue the conversation.
Hopefully in a future series we will bring you on, even with possibly a challenger, to have a real debate
Indeed.
online. Let's
very
make
happy
it happen.
to do that. Very happy
but,
to do that.
Thank you so much, and all
Pleasure.
the best in your journey.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raza.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Very
How did
good.
it go? You enjoy that?
Yeah, I enjoyed that.